Welcome back to our reflection on the Sunday Gospel that's about to follow, the 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And we invite you now to listen to the text. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover of the festival of the Jews was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." And so they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the signs that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Notice that he withdrew to the mountain. That's where he was sitting. So it's the mountain is at the beginning and the end. And in a sense, it captures the broader framework of this particular gospel. The first thing I wanted to say is that last week was the introduction to the multiplication of the loaves in Mark. But what the church has done is ditched Mark and put in John. So what we have here is John's account. And of course, if we've got John's account, it's from that long chapter 6. So again, we have to see the particular thing in the context. What I'd like to say here, I started to talk about the mountain. And I was thinking of the reference in the Old Testament where the Lord will make a banquet for them on the mountain. And of course, banquet is another word for heaven, for the kingdom, the glory, and things like that. So we need to see it in that context. And notice it's the Passover. So really, in a sense, what we've got here is a reflection on the Passover and the Eucharist. So, and of course, the two are linked in our tradition. Another thing that's there I just wanted to mention with regards to the signs, that John's a great one for having people think in a material way, and then he's thinking in a spiritual way. So the woman at the well was thinking of ordinary water. Jesus was thinking of water that goes beyond that. And I think that's the same thing here, that the people have come because they were hungry, as it were. But he sort of knew that. And in John, Jesus is always in command. You'll notice there what he has to say. He knows what he's going to do, but he tests Philip. Yeah. And the whole idea of testing in the scriptures, that Israel was tested in the desert, and here is a scene that is going to test them as well. So that whole background is important. And also the reference to Elisha, that Elisha had a great crowd, 100 men, and a little food, but he gave it to them, and they had things left over. So you've got to see this particular incident against that large background. So then Jesus gets the people to sit down. Some people see that as significant, the grass there. The Lord is my shepherd, he lays me down in green pastures. And some people see a reference to the actual going back to the manna, and of course the manna is clearly the Passover and capturing. So that larger scene of bread is important. And then Jesus does his thing, and he takes the loaves and uses that Eucharistic language. He gives thanks. That's the Greek word Eucharistai, and then he distributes it to the people. So really, that sort of Eucharistic language. A lot of commentators wouldn't see the Eucharistic section except in the bit that follows this particular one. I mean, I think what could be seen here is Jesus himself in his teaching as being things. But there's a very definite reference to the words taking and giving thanks that are part of the Last Supper account. So, and again, it's presented as a sign, and people tend to think he's the prophet coming into the world, which is the same, I think, as saying the Messiah. And then the conclusion there that they were going to take him and make him king. And while we're in the Gospel of John, you could almost say that John needed to mark in secret. You know, that Jesus didn't want that sort of thing, that really he would have a message to teach them that what they were expecting was not what was going to take place, and it was not what God was expecting. So those are some thoughts. I think it's a different way of expressing it as Mark would have expressed it, but nevertheless, I think the message comes through as a reflection on the Passover and the Eucharist.
I'm going to go with my strange. This is huge and it's monumental, and there's 5,000 people, and there's grass, and there's detail everywhere, and people being tested. But what struck me this time was the attention on the young boy who turned up with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Like, I just thought to myself, what was the young boy doing there in amongst this huge crowd to talk to Jesus, to listen to what he had to say? So to me, sometimes the small inclusion of a detail makes me ponder and think, do we recognise the importance of the young person and hearing those words and being there? Because we know it's the young boy who had those 2 loaves and 5 fish.
That's a good
so
point.
It just, in the midst of it all today, that's what struck me, the importance of allowing the young ones to hear what Jesus has to say.
The backdrop and the characters make for a great story, don't they?
Yes.
That we've got here. And thank you for the way in which you opened it up, David, with the mountain and so on. Yeah, that was great. It's extraordinary, isn't it? The sensitivity of this Jesus to the people. And he sees there is a need that they have, and that's a hunger. But he knows the real hunger, but he kind of addresses another hunger, the bodily need, and the response then from Philip, we so often make, well, so what? I can't do this, I can't do that, it's impossible. But then Jesus shows the value of the simple things, the ordinary things, and how that just, is it's blown out of all proportion, isn't it?
Yes.
And I mean, it's just a miracle, an experience of wonder, delight, of sheer amazement.
We invite you now to look at the text again. Remember that Lectio is meeting Jesus in the text of the scriptures. So what do you feel Jesus is messaging you today in reading that gospel? Welcome back. We invite you now to listen to the gospel for the second time.
After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain, sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one of them to get a little. And one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" And Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place as they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. And when the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself.
Yes, the thing that I took out of last week was really that time to go apart and to rest. And the mountain seems to have been a popular place for Jesus. So I thought again that I might look at how I could withdraw, not for a long time necessarily, but on a regular basis. I think the regularity is the important thing rather than just doing it once a year.
What struck me on the second reading, and I don't quite understand it yet, but the description of gathering all that was left over, putting it into the baskets, and the reference so that nothing may be lost. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it's drawing me back to consider that detail in the script. What's that implying for me, that attention?
In Elisha, the story of Elisha, there was some left over. So the leftovers, I think, are reflecting an Old Testament background. And I think it's talking about the abundance of what actually took place. And even with the manna, I'm not sure that I can remember exactly, but with the manna, they could only eat, they could only take what they wanted at the particular time. And I think that relates in some ways to what you're asking about, the leftovers. But I think it's the abundance of the mystery that is the thing, that such little did so much. And then I think not only did it, but it left over. They could have fed another 5,000. That's right.
No one will be lost.
That's right.
Hungry.
I think that's true.
How much is enough? There's a question going through my mind. How much is enough? How much do I need before I can share with others? And the other thought that was coming to mind was, love isn't love till it's given away. And they were the two things that captured my attention, imagination.
Yes, it's an important incident in the sense that it's mentioned 6 times in the scriptures. Yes. We invite you now to look at the text again and try to draw out something concrete and practical that you can apply in your life. Remember, it's not just the head knowing more, it's a question of putting it into practice so that as a result of prayer, and this is the end of all prayer, that you might lead a better life as a disciple of Jesus. I invite you now just to spend a short time in prayer, and our prayer is focused on our Lectio. It's not a time for praying for everybody. We can do that elsewhere. We're praying for the grace to actually implement what we have chosen to do. And that can take courage, it can take perseverance. So let us turn to the Lord and ask for those graces. thank you for your presence. We respect the fact that time is important, and you've given some time to share with us the scriptures, that meeting with Jesus, that it's so important in our life. We can conclude now by reading the prayer from the Gospel of the Sunday.
O God, protector of those who hope in you, without whom nothing has firm foundation, nothing is holy, bestow in abundance your mercy upon us, and grant that with you as our ruler and guide, we may use the good things that pass in such a way as to hold fast even now to those that ever endure, through Christ our Lord.